Andy Kelly, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much for having me on.
So, as a whiskey drinker, I've kind of channeled my attentions that way very much, and I haven't really developed much of a knowledge of wine. Don't even really know that much what I like. I suspect there's a certain amount of overlap between our two interests, and with a bit of coaching, I could become as much a snob about wine as I am about whiskey.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the principles with wine and whiskey drinking are generally the same. So for sort of intermediate wine drinker, you're going to start looking at maybe what's inside the glass first. You're then going to take the aromas in as well, see what sort of aromas you're getting from the nose. And also then, of course, what you're getting on the palate. The wine connoisseurs will have certain kind of glasses for certain kind of wines. And I also find it's very, very similar with whiskey. I've got a couple of very good whiskey drinking friends, and they sort of apply those same principles. And when I buy whiskey for them, I'm sort of looking for sort of what comes on the nose and what's on the palate, and I try and match it to their taste as best I can. So I think there is very much a good crossover. What I also find as well is that my whiskey drinking friends can enjoy a good glass of wine with me and appreciate the wine and the
Mhm.
tastes and aromas that they're getting from the wine. Now, I'm not necessarily there yet myself. I'm very much still a novice novice whiskey drinker, I should say. So, whilst I'm only really beginning on my journey, my whiskey drinking friends do really appreciate sort of my knowledge of wine, but also they can translate their whiskey knowledge into the wine world and appreciate a good glass of wine as well.
Mm. Yeah, it feels like the further you get in that one discipline, then you can just use some of the skills you got with wine in your whiskey tasting when you feel ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also the same with sort of food and wine pairings as well. So there are certain things with wine and food pairings that go. You can translate that into whiskey as well.
Hmm.
I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but that is possible. I don't know whether you want to maybe ask me that question next.
Might just do that.
But yeah, go for it.
But actually, I think I'll start us at the top. So,
No problem.
in the section before this, I told the quite well trodden story of how wine had a bit of trouble in the 19th century when Phylloxera came over from the United States, and how when the demand for wine and brandy was kind of the bottom was cut out of it, whiskey stepped in to fill the gap. Now, is the story as straightforward as I presented it there?
I think it's probably a little bit more complicated than that, to be honest with you. I sort of look at it from the good, the bad, and the ugly around this time. So the good, for cognac in particular, there is tax cuts in the 1840s on cognac, and that's followed by further tax cuts in the 1860s on wine, both
Mm.
fortified and unfortified. That meant that cognac imports over about a 20-year period from the 1840s to 1860s actually doubled into Britain.
Mm.
For wine, those same imports in a 6-year period actually grew sixfold. And also, brandy in particular was a drink of choice in the US because the US was actually enjoying what they call like a cocktail boom. Um, so it was a very, very popular drink inside the US as well. So there's quite a lot of good things going on there in the sort of for brandy and for wine in particular. It looks like they're still riding very much the crest of a wave. However, it's not all
Can
that
I just pause you there
straightforward.
for one sec? I think that was my doorbell.
Yeah, go
I'll just have to run. Sorry, this is going to be hell to edit. One sec.
on.
Oh no, don't worry. This is also not just you. Okay. Well, so looks like it's a early birthday present. That's.
Oh, excellent.
They asked for an age verification, so I think I'm going to guess that this is a bottle of whiskey of some kind.
Happy days. Happy days. I'm actually waiting on a wine order myself from Vivino, which is, it's like one of these big apps for wine, but you can buy wine from sort of smaller merchants that are on there. And I ordered it last week, and it's due today or tomorrow, but I've not had confirmation yet. So hopefully we won't be. I won't get a big...
Clearly, deliveries are still working.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's hope it's a good bottle anyway, mate.
Anyway, I'll get this back on track. Where were we? Sort of maybe backtrack a little bit in the answer.
Yeah, sure. So do you want me to go
brandy in the United States?
Yeah, okay. So I'll sort of say that again, because I wasn't sort of great with that one either. So in the United States, I'll
just give them a synchronizing point. And we're back.
Okay, excellent. So in the United States, brandy, usually cognac as well, was the basis for cocktails, and the United States was actually going through a cocktail boom right the way through the 19th century. So brandy was very much seen as still very popular throughout the US and in Britain, but it wasn't always that way, and it does sort of starts to slide down from about the 1860s, 1870s onwards. 1861 to 1865, you've got the US Civil War, and the wealthiest, particularly in the South, they would always drink cognac. Because the economy was ruined in the South. There was no longer that sort of desire to purchase cognac. Also, the Americans as a nation were beginning to really get into bourbon and rye drinks themselves, starting to learn to discover their own whiskey. So brandy very much took a back seat in the US market.
Yeah, the bourbon trend really stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, and for reasons that only Napoleon III knows himself, he decides to go and have a fight with Prussia in 1872 and is roundly beaten. It's actually one of France's shortest and most inglorious wars. So within weeks, Prussia are knocking on the gates of Paris, and they're only sent away because France agrees to pay about 1,500 tons worth of gold to them. Of course, France... or the French wealth, the elite in France don't necessarily pay for that. The people do via taxes, and what they do is they tax French cognac and French wine. So domestic consumption of cognac is hit really, really hard in the mid-1870s. Then you've got Phylloxera and all the damage that Phylloxera does to the French wine industry during that period.
Wow. So, like everything in life, I guess, there's no one straight answer. Just all these factors come together. So I guess France and the other wine-producing countries were really left reeling, but France particularly. Yes,
absolutely. So in terms of vineyard damage, about 60% of France's vineyards were hit in a 20-year period. There's about 2.5 million hectares of vines in France around this time, and about 1.5 million. Start that again. There are about 2.5 million hectares of vines in France at that time. Of those, 1.5 million hectares of vines are eaten by those little insects over a 20-25 year period, which is 60%. Cognac, or Charente in cognac, is hit particularly hard, and 86% of its vineyard coverage actually is destroyed over the same period. In 1875, France is producing about 83 million hectolitres of wine. So France is producing 83 million hectolitres of wine. That's costing about, or bringing into the French economy, about 545 million francs. By 1889, it's producing 23 million, and that's only bringing in 8 million francs into the economy.
Wow.
They think, or estimations are, that the total cost of the French economy was around 10 billion francs. which is extraordinary. Then, of course, you've got what it means to sort of the peasants as well. Wages in the industry fall from about 3 francs to 1.5 francs. And vineyards themselves were bringing in, or were costing, about 12,000 francs per hectare when they were making vines. So you could purchase a vineyard for about a hectare of vineyards for about 12,000 francs. That drops to about 600 francs. They are being sold as cornlands for about 600 francs, and not 15 years later. So there is a huge economic downturn in the French wine industry. Of course, you've then got the reputational damage as well. So what happens is, now that there's a massive gap in the market, you've got unscrupulous wine merchants and winemakers making and selling wine that is much cheaper, but they're selling them at the higher price, which really damages the reputation. And again, cognac has this problem as well. There are countries such as Greece and Italy that are producing cognac, producing brandy, putting cognac on the label. And of course, it is a mixed bag of results. Some of it is passable as brandy, others is downright undrinkable, and there's massive reputational damage done to cognac during that period as well.
So it's actually a pretty bad time. So it would be, I don't know, us whiskey drinkers sort of gloating that this was our time to rise. Maybe it feels like it's a little bit in bad taste. But we're all friends again now, I hope. Do you see a lot of overlap between us modern whiskey and wine drinkers, or sorry, modern whiskey drinkers and modern wine drinkers?
Yes, I do. I think that a lot of the principles that you have when drinking whiskey and wine are very similar. So for the sort of the intermediate wine drinker, they're probably going to know to choose specific glasses for specific wines. They're going to look at the colour of the wine inside the glass, because that will generally give you a good indication of whether the wine is going to be of any quality. You then are going to take in the aromas on the nose, and specific aromas again are going to sort of give you that indication of whether the wine's going to be good quality or not. And then, of course, you're going to take it onto the palate. Then you're going to sip it and see what the wine gives you on the palate. It's very much the same for whiskey, as far as I'm aware. You're going to look at the colour in the glass of the whiskey. There's certain aromas that come with certain types of whiskey from certain areas. And then, of course, you're going to want to see what it gets on the palate as well. And my whiskey drinking friends in particular can appreciate certainly a good glass of wine, because they use those principles that they've developed for their love of whiskey, and they just transfer it nice and easily over to when they're trying to enjoy a good glass of wine.
And actually, I wonder if this is something that maybe we learned in whiskey. A lot of folks have the idea that the traditional drinking glass for whiskey is a kind of square bottom tumbler, which in many cases it is. But I think we've now moved to the more modern but traditionally inspired kind of tulip shaped design, the Glencairn glass, and that's much more about getting into the nose of your whiskey. And I think that was a wine skill before it was a whiskey skill.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I have wine glasses that are just like that, but on a larger scale, and they're red wine. They're actually for red wine. So they start nice and bulbous at the bottom and come up nice and thin towards the top, and that really allows the aromas to come through, especially when you give the glass a good swirl for it to release its aromas.
So let's talk similarities and differences. Now, to a whiskey, the oak barrel aging is everything. That's a bit more optional in wine. But what does oak aging give to a wine?
Yeah, it is very much optional in a wine. What you would generally find is that red wines will have some sort of contact with oak before their bottling period, but it is very much, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very much a preference for white wines in particular. Now, oak aging in wine will impart various flavours. For red wine, you're going to kind of get flavours of vanilla, and funny enough, you're going to get oak as well. But because the wine barrels themselves, when they're made of oak, they're watertight, but they're not airtight, so they allow a specific amount of oxygen to get into the barrel and to actually mix with the wine. This allows the wine to age in a certain way, and that can give you hints of earth and leather as well. You generally find that in sort of the better wines from Bordeaux in France, specifically Pauillac or Saint-Emilion, or somewhere like that. With white wines,
Hmm.
I think they actually give you more kind of flavors. You get flavors of cream, I think butter in particular, vanilla you're going to get as well, but you might also get brioche with that sort of aging aspect of it. It also affects the body of the wine more for white wine. So the white wine will have a fuller body, and the wines themselves will be golden, much more golden in colour instead of the traditional pale lemon. But that is, of course, all its preference. There are fantastic wines that have been oaked, but there are also fantastic white wines in particular that have been unoaked, and they will be generally more fruit forward, more acidic, and will be sort of will have a higher acidity, a higher minerality content than their oaked counterparts.
It's interesting to hear. There's so much I hear there that is familiar to me. We don't have the choice with the oak casks. We've got to have at least 3 years and then up to 20, 30, 40 in them. But those flavors of vanilla, the kind of leathery flavors, we talk about that a lot in whiskey, and it's really nice to hear that wine is getting the same kind of thing. But what kind of balance do you have between natively European oak species and oak that's been grown in America? Because they're a different species and they have a big impact on whiskey.
Yeah, they do. It's not my forte, really, with that one. I'm aware of the species, so European oak and American oak in particular. I'm pretty sure that European oak, I think the flavour characteristics are different, but I'm probably not best placed to really give a great answer for that one. To be
Sure, that
honest
was
with
kind
you,
of a
I'll leave it
surprise question, but that's the whiskey buff on really solid ground when it comes to oak, because we talk about oak about 60% of the time. So I'll pull back on that.
No problem.
But even before either of our spirits, either of our liquors gets into the barrel, there's the process of making it. And when you talk about wine, terroir is a huge word, which isn't mentioned quite so often in whiskey. There's a big debate as to whether terroir even really exists in whiskey. So what does terroir mean to wine, and is there something that we can transfer to whiskey from that?
Yeah, so terroir to wine is basically the sense of place that you can define within the taste of the wine. To define terroir it's generally to do with the soil, the climate of the region, the microclimate of the region, the grapes that are actually used within that region as well, and also the winemaking process. The terroir of somewhere like Bordeaux, for example, will be greatly different to the terroir in Burgundy, even though they both produce absolutely fantastic wines. However, the terroir in Bordeaux, within Bordeaux, can be very different. So when I talk about red wine, I love my red wine, and I really enjoy drinking wine from Bordeaux. The left bank of Bordeaux, or the left bank of the Gironde Estuary, has a very different terroir from the right bank of the Gironde Estuary, even though they're really only a stone's throw away in geographical terms. The soils are completely different. The winemakers use different grapes in the blends, and there's also microclimates, different microclimates within each commune, even within each vineyard. It can be that sort of nuanced. It's also very important for cognac. There are 6 crus or terroir in cognac in particular. You've got Petit Champagne and Grand Champagne. They're generally seen as probably the highest quality, and the soils they have are predominantly chalk. You've then got, sort of on the opposite end of the scale, there's, I think it's called fin ordinaire, or bois ordinaire, sorry, it is called bois ordinaire. Now that is generally seen as perhaps the least favoured of all of the 6 terroir in cognac. And it's got kind of they say like a maritime kind of taste to it. It's very salty.
Oh yeah.
Whereas the Petit Champagne and Grand Champagne, you get more floral notes as well. But you've got other terroir in between, and the soils are very, very different. Or the makeups of the soils are very, very different within each region. We're only really talking about a small region as well for cognac. So yeah, each of these communes or each of these terroirs are very, very different and provide a very different taste to the discerning cognac drinker.
It seems like some of that could be applied to us in whiskey. So what we're kind of saying is that grapes have a long memory that even survives distillation, because cognac is distilled grape juice in the way that we're doing distilled barley juice. And so we have our terroirs in Scotland. If you're in the islands, you might expect some of those maritime notes you were talking about. If a whiskey matures somewhere near the sea, you might get a touch of saltiness to it. And then the barley itself, it's going to have different soils, but then you distill it. So how much stays in it? We're going to keep debating about this for a while, but I'm comforted to know that people talk about terroir in cognac because that's actually quite close in its method of production to whiskey.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Where do you fall on the sort of the idea of terroir in whiskey?
When it comes to barley, I don't know. I'd speak more confidently on the terroir of maybe the peat. So if we're burning peat to infuse our whiskey with a bit of smoke, where you dig that peat up in Scotland, that will have a huge effect. If you're out by the coast where traditionally there'd be sort of like ocean flora, seaweeds and stuff, you'll kind of taste the ocean in your peat quite a lot. But if you're inland where it's a bit drier, you might have a more dry, more floral smoke. So I'm pretty confident there. The maturation near the sea, if it's happening, I'm pretty confident to talk about that as well. Or the location of your warehouse as well. Like if it's dim and cold and underground, that's going to have probably an effect as well. And then there's where you grew your barley. We do have different varieties. We do have different soils. And Scotland, on its north-south axis, changes quite a lot where you go, depending where you go. But then you sort of make your whiskey and then you distill the crap out of it. And how much of the barley's terroir survives that process, I don't think anyone's ready to fully commit to what that means yet. But fun to have those debates.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. No, I'm going to skip past that one. But so, how do you feel about certain whiskey makers going to France and Spain and Italy, buying up some old wine casks, taking them home to Scotland, and then putting their whiskey inside to get some of those flavors? How's that as a strategy?
I think it's a very good strategy. The strategy was very well employed actually by distillers in the 1880s, 1890s. There were a lot of reports of whiskey at the time being a bit too harsh for the discerning English drinker. So what they discovered quickly was that if you age the whiskies in sherry casks that had been imported over from Spain, it would mellow the whiskey and it would make it taste a little bit more like brandy. It was actually a bit of a pain to ship the casks back, so it kind of suited everybody for the whiskey to be matured in those casks. For me in particular, I think it should be done. Casks are expensive, and it can cost anywhere between £500 and £1,500 for one wine barrel in particular. Also, it takes one oak tree to produce 2 wine barrels as well. So, I don't want to see any more trees being felled for this industry than need to be. Certainly, we should be replacing them quicker than we're felling them. So we should.
How long do you reckon it takes to replace a single oak tree?
Well, so what they normally do is the minimum age for wine, I believe, or for oak casks to be classed as oak casks for them to transfer their flavours is about 80 years. But a lot of winemakers won't go near barrels unless they're over 200 years old.
Wow.
So the cost can be enormous. But if you can then, as a winemaker, if you can purchase a wine barrel, if you can then use that wine barrel for what you need, and you can then sell that barrel on to a distiller who will get longer time out of it, who can mature their whiskies for a longer period, everybody wins as far as I'm concerned. The winemaker will be able to recoup some of his money back. The distiller will get barrels that are a little bit cheaper than they would be if they were new. And of course, I'm pretty sure, and hopefully you can correct me on this or certainly elaborate on it, but the distiller can then sell those barrels on to the seafood industry, and maybe they can then be used for other storage. Is that correct?
It can. We often use the barrels for a few rounds of maturation sometimes, but it's that first fill after the wine was in there that tends to be the most valuable. But yeah, they can have quite a long life maturing whiskey. Each time you refill them, they will be a little milder. They won't have the same strong flavors, but that can be desirable as well. And then when they're really burnt out, Yeah, they can be used in other industries that don't need the barrel flavor as much, or they can even be converted into luxury furniture and stuff like that.
Which is really good. You've touched on a very good point there. For wine in particular, the barrel the life cycle of the barrel only lasts between 3 and 5 years.
Oh, wow.
After between 3 and 5 vintages that have been stored in that barrel, the barrel itself is no longer imparting those flavors onto the wine the winemaker would want. So there is actually a life cycle. Once those winemakers have had their barrels for 3 to 5 years, they are probably going to look to move those barrels on and purchase new barrels. So it's probably an industry sort of within itself, really. But yeah, absolutely. I think that distillers, as much as possible, should be purchasing wine barrels. It's cheaper for the distiller, and it allows the winemaker in particular to recoup some of that fortune, and it's safe on the environment.
Yeah, I think a lot of our distillers have definitely taken that advice to heart. The sherry barrels, as you said, the sherry casks, they're a big player. Sherry matured whiskey is very well known, but then there are red and white wine casks, which every so often will pop up as well. And I wonder, you self-proclaimed whiskey novice, but have you encountered any really exciting whiskey and wine crossovers yourself?
I'm actually looking at a couple at the moment. In particular, there's a winery. There is a distillery in Argentina, Patagonia.
Oh, right.
It's called La Alanzana. They're a very, very small distillery. They have just produced 100% Patagonian single malt, and it's actually still in maturation at the moment. Hopefully, within the next couple of years, we're going to see that hit the market. They're such a small distillery that they're only still actually selling their whiskies from the distillery itself. But what they are doing is that they've, on their website, it advertises quite well that they get people flying up from sort of Rio de Janeiro and other places around South America, Latin America, to come and sample and purchase these whiskies. So I'll be really, really keen to see how they do within the next couple of years when that whiskey hits the market. Yeah. And there's another one from South Africa, and you will probably know this one, Baines. Baines Distillery.
Baines in South Africa.
Yeah, South Africa. So they're actually right in the heart of the Western Cape. And the Western Cape is where 90% of all South African wines are made. And South Africa makes some absolutely outstanding wines, both red and white in particular. Baines has actually won quite a few awards, I believe, for their latest one. Triple award winner apparently, and it's also been double matured in the whiskey that I'm looking at has been double matured in American oak barrels for 3 years, and then for a further up to 30 months. It's saying that you're going to get sort of nice floral aromas from it as well, with touches of oak and hopefully a bit of spice. That's on the market now, so I'm probably going to purchase one for a good friend of mine he's into his South African whiskies. I'm going to see if he fancies a bottle of that. It's relatively you can get it quite well. It's quite easily to hand, and it's not that expensive either. So yeah,
decent. Yeah, and it's nice to hear sort of Argentina, South Africa, and I guess Australia as well. They're wine producing countries, so they can close that loop. Here in Scotland, well, we're not at the point of making wine yet. Give global warming a few more years to really take hold, and we'll be able to close that loop ourselves as well. For my part, two kind of outstanding wine finished whiskies that I've encountered here, Scotch whiskies. They were in my collection at one point, no longer. There was an Arran, quite a young distillery, that was in an Amarone cask. I think that's an Italian red.
Oh, that is an Italian red. So Amarone is the most powerful, full-bodied Italian red that you can get. Amarone is fantastic. Absolutely.
It did wonders with the whiskey. And yeah, it was quite punchy, as you say. Another one, and tell me if I got the pronunciation on this, but a Crow's Hermitage.
Yeah, not bad. Yeah, Crow's Hermitage. Yeah.
Crow's Hermitage. Okay, so
that's French,
it was a Balblair in that, and that was mellower, but again, really nice.
Yeah. So Crow's Hermitage, French in particular. Yeah, fantastic. Again, fantastic terroir, fantastic region, winemaking appellation.
Right. So this is actually a really sort of happy relationship we've worked out with each other, wine and whiskey, whiskey and wine. Do you reckon, though, there are any tips that the wine making industry could pass on to the whiskey making industry, or vice versa?
Um, I confess I'm not necessarily too sure on this one. What I will say is that when I've been doing my research, what stood out with the Argentinian distillery in particular is that they cited the very small variations in seasonal temperatures as one of the main beneficiaries of putting their distillery where it was in the Andes Mountains. Of course, you're maturing whiskies in oak barrels in particular that generally have come from the wine industry. And also we've talked a little bit about terroir and how terroir is probably developing perhaps with whiskey. In terms of techniques, probably I'm not the best person to ask on that one, if I'm going to be honest.
Fair. Yeah, I actually, if you bounce that question back at me, I'd also hold up my hand and say, what I can say though, and this is something that we probably both have been experiencing our entire lives, food. Now, wine has a really long relationship of being paired with food. In fact, it's really seen as the best thing to do with wine is to have it with a nice meal. Whiskey's starting to take its first steps. I think it's even taken its first steps already, but people are getting more comfortable with drinking whiskey while they have food. So why was it so successful for wine? Do you think it could also work for whiskey?
I think when you're pairing wine with food, what you want to do is that you want both the pleasurable experience from the wine and the pleasurable experience from the food to be combined together to create a much more pleasurable experience. Obviously, wine and food pairing has been around for a long, long time, and it's been written about for many, many years. I find it quite subjective, and I think there are only certain principles that you can take with wine and food pairing, but I think you can apply those principles to whiskey pairing with food as well. So, for example, with wine, you should generally choose a wine that is sweeter than the dish that you're having as well, which is why you get a lot of sweet wines paired really, really well with desserts in particular. You want to kind of keep the flavour intensity of the wine and the food very much the same. You don't really want one to overpower the other because that's just going to create a bit of a negative tasting experience for you. And you should try and keep the dishes. So dishes that are quite bitter, you should try and have the wine that is less bitter. I'll phrase that a little bit better.
Sure.
So dishes that often pair well, dishes that are bitter, that's it. Dishes that are bitter often pair well with wines that are lower in tannin. Now, tannin in wine is quite bitter and astringent. So if you get a food that's quite bitter and a wine that's quite bitter, that combined bitterness is probably going to give you an unpleasurable experience again when tasting. I think that can be transferred over to whiskey in particular. I think if you were to have a smoky whiskey and you're having that with, I don't know, let's say smoked salmon, for example, I think if you combine the smokiness of the whiskey and the smokiness of the salmon, it's probably going to give you, it combines a rather unpleasurable taste overall. I think that my whiskey friends also talk a lot about sweetness in the whiskey. They like them to be quite sweet. So you could, in theory, pair a sweet whiskey with desserts. I think that's absolutely possible. Light, fragrant whiskies are probably going to pair well with maybe salmon and cream cheeses too. So, I think whilst it's very much established in the wine industry, I think it is very much up and coming in the whiskey industry, and it absolutely has a place within the whiskey industry. I think there are going to be some fantastic whiskey and food pairings that lay undiscovered. I think a lot of people are going to jump on the bandwagon, and rightly so, because I think there is a market for it in particular.
Absolutely. Anecdotally, and actually, I think referring back to what Rachel McCormack said in our first episode, if you've got a smoky whiskey, pair it with a really intense blue cheese. There's some real magic that happens between those two.
Right. Okay. Interesting. I'll pass that on. I'll be definitely passing that on to my friends. Definitely.
Nice. So neither of us have a glass of wine or a dram in our hands right now. So the next thing is going to be a completely intellectual exercise to see how well we know our respective fields. Now, we both lined up some tasting notes, which we found in various places online, sometimes describing whiskey, sometimes describing wine. And we're going to do a little game of guess those notes to see if we know which one appends to which one. Maybe we could put a little score on both sides of the screen like that, see how well we're doing. So shall I go first? Would you like the first set of notes?
Go on, I'll go first.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so number one.
Yeah.
A strong scent of toffee apples dominates the underlying honey note. Sweet on the palate, giving way to a spicy, warming finish.
Now that sounds a lot like a whiskey to me. And let's make this more interesting. It's not just a whiskey, it's a Balblair 1990.
Oh, okay. It is a whiskey. It's I'm gonna get this completely wrong. How is it? Auchentoshan, 12 years.
Auchentoshan, the Glasgow local whiskey.
Auchentoshan, 12 years.
Nice. Yeah, it's the toffee apple is something I've heard quite a lot. We talk about caramel and toffee apples quite a lot in our whiskies, and I wonder maybe some wines can go that way. All right.
Okay.
How about this one? Orange, black cherries, dried fruit and ginger, spiked with dark bitter chocolate and enriched with lingering oak. Superlatively full-bodied and creamy.
I'm going to go for whiskey.
You're right. It is a whiskey. It's an Aberlour Abuna batch 50, I think, is the tasting notes I took there. So yeah, matured in a sherry cask, so that's why you're getting a lot of those kind of red wine overlap notes in it.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. I'll go one. I'm happy that I got one.
Yeah.
Okay, next one for me. Pronounced, jumping out of the glass with almonds, toasty vanilla, sultanas, and dried fruit. Palate of caramel, orange blossom, even a bit of pastry and icy sugar sweetness.
Ooh, now that one's tough. Okay, we got almonds, but then it starts to go raisins as well. I'm gonna say it's a wine, and I'm gonna say it's a full-bodied white, maybe some kind of Chablis.
Oh, okay. It is a wine. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, right.
It is Château-le-Ville Chardonnay, so it is a very sweet wine.
Huh. Nice. That could so easily have been a whiskey. I was 50-50 on that one. All right. A good mouthfeel, which brings both sweetness as well as some bitter tannins. Blackberries, red currants, peaches all make for some intense fruitiness. Also some heavy spicing, pepper, cinnamon, and a hint of cumin.
Wow. Okay. I was 100% sure that was a red until you said peaches. I'm gonna go wine. Go on, I'll say wine.
The peaches nearly gave it away, but it was a whiskey.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, I sort of I thought, how can I make this sound like a red? So it's a cask finished whiskey. It's the Tomatin Portwood 14-year-old.
Wow. Okay.
So peaches is a tell there. So everything.
Yeah, I think I was. That's what made me. I was like, no, go on, go stick with your first evaluation.
I'm not going to give you two whiskeys in a row, right?
Okay. Next one. Colour is gold. Nose fragrance, but more pronounced. Sorry, I'll start that again. Nose. Fragrance,
before we start it again, the camera just switched itself off, so I'm gonna.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
I guess it got bored of this game. Hopefully. That's
okay. So I'll start from the top.
Thanks.
So, colour is gold. Nose fragrance, but with more pronounced almond aroma. Taste is smooth, creamy, fruity, with a hint of smoke.
Ah, well, okay, there we go. Unless there's some tricky wine out there that does a hint of smoke, but no, I'm going to say it's a whiskey, and if it's a hint of smoke and almonds, let's say it's... Okay, I'm going to... wait, the name's escaping me now. I'm going to say it's that whiskey from the Highlands. Is it an Ardmore?
No, it's not. It is whiskey. It is absolutely whiskey. Again, I'm probably going to get this completely wrong. Knocando?
Knocando. Yeah, Knocando. Yeah.
Knocando, 1991, 12 years.
Oh, not one that I've had, but that sounds pretty good. But it's smoke. I don't think that's a tasting note for wine very often, right?
With reds, you can get smoke. Smokiness comes through with reds.
So I'm not even on solid ground with that. Interesting. Okay, this one's quite straightforward. Raspberries, cherry tart, and licorice offset with a bit of pepper and almond.
That's got to be wine. That's got to be wine.
Want to take a punt on which one? Because it is.
Okay. Give me the fruits again.
Raspberries, cherry tart, and then you've got licorice as well.
Okay, raspberry, cherry tart, licorice. There's going to be a bit of a spice there. I'm going to go for Beaujolais.
I actually don't know. Maybe it is a Beaujolais. Maybe it isn't. It's a Châteauneuf du Pape.
Okay. So Châteauneuf du Pape, Southern Rhone. Yeah, I probably should have known that, to be honest with you. But that's not Beaujolais.
Okay.
That's not Beaujolais. No, it's not. So it's from France, but no, I'm a little bit off there.
Oh, the terroir got. Yeah, you were there. All right. This is fun. I'm enjoying this. We probably won't be able to.
It is good. Okay, so I need to make sure I can read my own handwriting. So, like gold in the glass, with a nose of fruity aromas, raisins with fragrant heather and cereal notes. Taste is sweet, fruity cereal flavours with a spicy edge. Floral, freshly cut grass notes. Finish is balanced, sweet and round.
Right.
That's a big one. If you want me to say it again.
No. That's good. That's good. I'm focusing on the word heather, which is such a Scottish word that it's either a red herring or it's a sign that it's a whiskey. But maybe you're trying to fox me with that one. So I'm going to say it's a wine, and it's a Chateau Rothschild de Savigny-Balzac.
It's a whiskey.
It is a whiskey. The heather was...
It's a whiskey. Milton Duff, 10 years old.
Ah, nice.
Milton Duff, aged 10 years.
Yeah, I guess I should have followed my heart on the heather like you should have on the peaches. How about this one then? Pungent on the nose, full of gooseberry and nettle aromas, and a liminess too. Really nicely textured, lemon rind, grassy flavours coming to the fore.
It's got to be a wine. It's got to be a wine.
It is, yeah. Jacob's Creek, Sauvignon Blanc.
yeah, that was quintessential wine. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
We got one more each,
5.
right?
Yeah, number 5 from me. On the nose, pear, apricot with a hint of mango. On the palate, pear, lemon zest, apricot, mango, honey with a hint of almond and minerals.
Okay. Could be either. You've given me quite a lot of whiskies, so I'm going to go with wine this time. And it is it's a white. It can't be a red with that description.
Correct. Yeah, wine.
So I don't know. It's a white. I'm not going to name any grapes, but I'll say it's from Chile.
Okay. No, it's from Austria. It's a Riesling from Austria.
Riesling.
Yeah, but no, you got that. So that's 4 out of 5.
All right. Who's keeping score, really? Fine. All right. Here's my last one. A fresh, clean nose with hints of apples, pear drops, key lime pie, and bubblegum, fading to a cinnamon sugar aroma.
Oh, bubblegum. Bubblegum's an interesting one with wine. Go on. I'm gonna go whiskey.
I actually would have given it to you whatever you said, because it's kind of both. It's whiskey done in a wine cask. It's a Glenmorangie in a Chardonnay cask.
Oh, okay. That's some really interesting tasting notes there.
It's a really interesting whiskey as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Perfect.
That was really good.
Well, hopefully people like the sight of wine and whiskey enthusiasts geeking out over tasting notes without actually drinking anything, because this is bread and butter for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. I mean, that's the end of my questions officially, but are there any other things that you think might be worth mentioning that we didn't go over?
Not really. There was only one thing that I probably didn't bring in when you asked me in particular about was it as simple as that? Was whiskey overtaking brandy as simple as that? I didn't really touch on Scotch. Sort of getting into its stride at that point as well. So you've got the Excise Act of 1823, which generally kicks off the whiskey industry as we know it today. You've then got the coffee still, the introduction of the coffee still in 1831, which allows whiskey to be produced much cheaper, much more cheaply and easily. And then you've got, in particular, in the 1800s, there was a book by Alfred Barnard, and I think it was the Whisky Distilleries of the United Kingdom. A lot of sort of English drinkers at the time, perhaps not that well known or didn't know whisky that well. The introduction of Barnard's book really brought whisky into the social conscious, and it probably really helped whisky establish itself, along with Phylloxera, along with all the other sort of issues that we talked through. But it probably helped whisky sort of weather the storm that was to come over the next 20, 30, 40 years. When we talk about wine, there's the golden age of wine. It starts from about 1800 to about 1860. You've then got a period of about 80 years. And it's really that bad. So you've got, I think it's called oidium, which is the first disease that kicks off in about 1840s. Destroys a lot of vineyards. You've then got phylloxera, and you've then got powdery mildew. Now, powdery mildew actually comes across with the American vines that the Europeans were going to graft onto Vitis vinifera. So there's a hat trick there of three diseases and pests. You've then got the First World War. You've then got Prohibition. And you've then got the Second World War. So I think whisky was already beginning to really find itself. I think phylloxera helped absolutely, but I also think that because taxes because the Excise Act kicked off the industry, and because there were writers writing about whisky and sort of bringing whisky into the social consciousness, it really did help whisky, or supported whisky through what would be then, or to come, another 20, 30 years of what was essentially a bad time for alcohol consumption.
So a little bit of luck, a little bit of hard work, and we have the whiskey industry we know and love today.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Cool. I'm going to stop things.
Just one more thing. Sorry, Sam. You could maybe ask about why did it take so long for the wine industry to that? Because it probably raised a laugh actually with some of the some of the issues that they had with it. So potentially could be worth asking that one.
Yeah, I'll get it. We'll have all the material, and then we can make it sort of come together for sure.
Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
Got some. So I have to. All right. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to move my phone ever so slightly. There we go. That's it. Just because, basically, so am I in about the same position I was before?
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, cool.
In fact, so I'm thinking,
Go on.
I'm thinking I might lead into it. So yeah, I can say. So France has been hit by this great misfortune, lost countless amounts of money. So I'm guessing the French government put their very best team onto the case to try and get wine to bounce back.
Not really, no. No, they didn't. It took quite a while. It took quite a while for the solution to be found, but it also took quite a while for them to actually find out what the problem was and that it was actually phylloxera. So it's first reported in Provence in about 1863. It's not until about 1868 where they actually then French scientists actually find what the problem was. And it was because they were initially pulling up already dead rootstocks or dead vines. Once the vines were dead, of course, the phylloxera, they were just moving on to live vines then. And what they were also doing, phylloxera, was they would eat a certain amount of the vines and then move on to something else. So there were vines that actually looked still quite healthy, but were dying already. Also, when they actually discover, when a guy called Jules-Émile Planchon discovers that it's phylloxera in 1868, they don't believe it at first. They actually don't believe that something so small could cause so much devastation, which, is unbelievable.
That's hubris.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's going to get better. It is going to get better. So what happens is, once they finally get over themselves, they set up, there's a commission set up, and a reward is offered to anybody who can find the cure for phylloxera. Now, anybody can submit anything they want here. And some of the things that were submitted are absolutely fantastic. So one of the things that they try, and scientists try this, so you generally don't find a cure because scientists are too busy trying some of these idiotic suggestions that people have put forward. So they bury a live toad. One of the suggestions is to bury a live toad under each vine because that will stop disease.
Okay.
Now that's actually taken from Pliny's Natural History. Doesn't work. Some people have the brainy idea to spray the vines with urine, spray the vines with wine, and also spray the vines with holy water. Now I don't know in which order they actually did that, but needless to say that it didn't work. Another suggestion was to beat the ground around the area of the vines to get rid of the pests, and also to hire marching bands to play music as loud as they could as well around the vines so that the vibrations of the sound would hopefully disturb the pests. Didn't work, as you can imagine.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then finally, my favourite was exorcism. They actually tried to exorcise the vines as well, and that was tried and tested, and obviously it failed.
That's people at the end of their tether. But I wish that the marching bands had worked, because that would mean that every wine growing season in every wine growing country, the marching bands would descend upon the vineyards and just play their best tunes just to keep the vines safe. I'd love that.
It would keep spirits up, wouldn't it? I suppose, yeah. in many ways. No pun intended. It would keep spirits up. The final sort of thing that I should maybe discuss with this is that the answer was staring them in the face, and it was staring them in the face for over 2,000 years. So they looked at Pliny, and they reviewed Pliny's Natural History, and that's where they got the toad. That's where the idea of the toad in the clay jar came from. If someone was to actually just scour Pliny's book, Natural History, a little bit further, he talks extensively about grafting, and he talks extensively about grafting vines as well. Also, in the 1500s, Spanish who colonized Mexico, they were grafting European vines onto American rootstocks, and they were doing it for 350 years. So the answer is staring them plain in the face, and they just, for whatever reason, the French wine industry, they're not quick on the uptake. I think it is hubris. I do think it is hubris. If you think about it, it's discovered in 1868. It's not until 1881 that Bordeaux agrees to actually graft European vines onto American rootstocks. Burgundy doesn't follow suit until 1887. The damage is already done. By that point. The damage is absolutely already done. Cognac in particular as well. Because of the chalky soils in Cognac, Phylloxera takes longer to reach Cognac and to actually cause damage. But American rootstocks also take longer to acclimatise to the new environment. So it takes much longer to find a species of American rootstock that will graft well with Vitis vinifera in that area.
And then they got the mildew after that anyway.
And they brought mildew with them as well, yeah. Thankfully, they did find a cure for that rather quickly. But it still, in itself caused untold damage, absolutely.
I guess Scottish barley, look at that situation and learn from it. Go back, read your ancient Roman classics, and instead of burying a toad, read to the next few chapters, and the solution might be staring you in the face if anything does happen to our source of barley.
Touch wood indeed. Touch wood indeed.
Well, I got to say, this has been a lot of fun. I don't know if I did a formal outro, so this has been a lot of fun. Andy Kelly, if people want to see a bit more of your enthusiasm for wine, just head over to Get Your Cork Out and see what he has to say. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Sam, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure and it's been grateful. Thank you.
Awesome.